there's a lot of developments that have transpired in the last several months. You had the Patriot missile battery that has been promised to Ukraine. It seems like that is going to be transferred soon. A lot made about that. But there has been a sense of permanency, right? There were peace talk conversations in the media. NATO, the US, some European countries made some hints at it, but all with the caveat that Ukraine needs to do better on the battlefield. It needs more victories. It needs more weapons. Now we're seeing that come into fruition, not just with the Patriot missiles. I guess today or yesterday, I should say, Biden has been hinting at maybe sending these Bradley vehicles, which I am not as much of an expert as you on military hardware and weaponry. Maybe you can get into that. But before I do, there was also this Mekayevka attack where 89 now, probably more Russian military personnel were killed. And there's also been several attacks, shellings by Ukraine in other areas of the Donbass where there have been dozens and dozens of civilians killed in the Zaporozhye region. Could you talk about where you feel like this is going? Because it feels like, in my opinion, that we are in for a pretty long period of conflict. I know we can't necessarily guarantee this, but it feels like there is going to be much conflict in Ukraine, and that NATO, the U.S. has no real interest in stemming it or in curbing their aggression.
I think that's exactly it. It's, we see Russia taking steps to settle into a long-term, protracted, but also large-scale conflict. They are ramping up their military-industrial capacity, which is already very significant. They're ramping it up further. This is not something you would do if you thought this was going to be settled anytime soon. They've got the mobilization. That is something that is still working its way toward, the point where they're actually going to be used. They're still training some of these mobilized soldiers in the rear. They're still waiting to go to the front. So they're settled in for a long-term conflict. And I think that is the point here. 2023, Russia is settling in for a long-term conflict. And we see the West also. You were talking about talk amongst the West about peace talks. I don't think they have any credibility at all whatsoever, since first German and now French politicians have admitted that any talk of peace throughout this entire conflict from 2014 onward, when the U.S. and its allies overthrew the elected government of the Ukraine, installed the client regime in its place, and triggered this entire conflict in the first place, any talk of peace was always to buy time to build up their proxies in Ukraine and continue this threat that the Russian-speaking Ukrainians in the East have faced, and actually all across Ukraine, and also the threat this new Ukraine, this NATO-ized Ukraine poses to Russia right on its own border. So that is what we're going to be looking at. So the idea that Russia is going to do all of these sweeping offensives, I think there's no evidence that they will do that. You can never rule out it for sure, but it really seems like the leadership has said they're going to grind down the Ukrainian military. This is going to be a systematic, methodical, long-term process. It's just the realities of modern warfare. And right before the show, we were talking about Syria. Look how long that conflict, that is a proxy conflict, also engineered by the United States and its allies, and that has grinded on for over 10 years now. So I think this is not going to be a month or a year. It's going to be years, plural, with an S. It's going to be a long-term conflict. You were talking about this HIMARS strike. This took place right before New Year, so that's over a week ago, and the Western media is still talking about this HIMARS strike. Why have they seized upon this? Why are they talking so much about this? It's because it doesn't happen often. Ukraine has HIMARS. Before they had HIMARS, they had their own multiple launch rocket systems. They had Tochka-U missiles, which had a longer range, and they were using those to carry out attacks. And every once in a while, they would get a lucky shot in, and they would talk about it in the media. But it happens very rarely, and that is why they're talking about it. They're trying to give it political weight because it has no strategic or tactical weight. They killed Now the count is up to 89. Ukraine gave their number on the first day that it happened. How could they possibly know how many Russian soldiers died? There's no way for them to have known. The Russian number is much more realistic and credible. They said 60 something. They're still counting the dead. They're up to 89. Yes, that is a significant loss for Russia. For Ukraine, Russia carries out strikes like this on a nearly daily basis. Ukraine has HIMARS. Russia has Tornado S. They also have cruise missiles. They also have Garan 2 drones. They have the Lancet drone. They have the Kub loitering munition drone. They have unguided multiple launch rocket systems, long-range guided artillery. They have the Iskander missile system, which has a range between 4 and 500 kilometers. So that they have many more means and many more opportunities to carry out strikes like this. When you put it in the proper perspective, this strike is solely to boost the political optics, which is something the West and Ukraine, that really is all they have at this point.
Yeah. And, it seems to me what you're saying is that whether it's the Patriot missiles or this recent attack, this HIMARS attack, or whether it's just these new vehicles that might be sent to Ukraine, and none of this is really changing the overall situation when it comes to how this conflict is developing militarily. What would you say about Ukraine's chances? Because it feels like one of the reasons why Ukraine conducted, or has been talking up, I should say, this strike is because they want to make it out to seem like if they get more support, if they get everything that they want, that this will mean that they can. And they're even talking about more strikes inside of Russian territory, which, of course, a lot of the Donbass now has voted into Russia. But they're talking more about how the more strikes that occur like this, the more that they will be on their way to victory. What do you have to say about that?
Again, for this to make any sort of difference, first people have to understand the scale of Russia's military, the scale of Russia's geography. It's the largest country by land area on Earth. So the idea of first Ukraine would have to match what Russia is doing in terms of these long-range precision strikes. They have to match it in quantity and quality, which is impossible. It is impossible without the United States and its allies all joining directly in this conflict. There's no way to transfer these capabilities to Ukraine in any reasonable amount of time. We're talking years under ideal conditions. That's how long it would take to train them up and get everything ready for them to use it. This is not a possibility. So the U.S. would have to intervene directly to even make it an even fight. So the idea of Ukraine on their own improving their situation by carrying out more strikes like this, it's not possible. They have a dwindling number of HIMARS launchers. The U.S. admits they have a dwindling number of guided rockets. And so how are they going to increase this? Now, they have been carrying out strikes like this all since they got HIMARS and before that with their own systems. But again, it's too few and far between to change the outcome of the conflict. You were talking about the United States contemplating sending these Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. So they, to an ordinary person, they kind of look like tanks. They have light armor. They do not have a heavy gun like a main battle tank. They're for moving infantry around and giving fire support for infantry. It is not the equivalent of a tank. Ukraine needs tanks. And they're not getting any more tanks. France is sending these AMX 10 RC. These are light tanks. They have wheels rather than tracks. They have a lighter gun and also lighter armor. Both of these vehicles combined, and if you had them on the battlefields, most of what Russia is fielding, anything above small arms fire is going to destroy these vehicles. They are not tanks. They are not a substitute for tanks. So sending these may prolong the conflict, and it might force Russia to, they have their defensive lines now. And if Ukraine concentrates enough of these systems in one place and launches an offensive, it would force Russia to weather the offensive, destroy all of these vehicles and the men using them, and then they will continue dismantling Ukraine, their defenses, their infrastructure. So this is going to be the process until we can see what the West is doing there. Every challenge they face, they escalate, and they're going to continue escalating. There is no exit strategy for them. They will continue to exit until everything crumbles, like it did in Afghanistan and like it's doing in Syria.
Yeah. And I want to ask you actually about something that has been revealed. A lot has been made about the way Russia is conducting this war in the Western media, the airstrikes, the drone strikes, the targeting of Ukraine's infrastructure. There's been people like Michael McFaul, Obama's former ambassador to Russia, has literally been writing self-reflective pieces about whether he is a warmonger, citing Russia's so-called war crimes. But recently, a former special operations officer, Jack Murphy, has revealed that the CIA, the United States through the CIA, has actually been conducting sabotage inside of Russia. Of course, we've had developments like what happened to the Crimea Bridge, like what happened to Nord Stream, that would suggest that there is heavy involvement from the U.S. and its allies in these kind of sabotage attacks. But now we have definitive proof from this special operations officer who has been tracking and tracing a NATO ally, unnamed NATO ally. I guess we can make guesses as to who that NATO ally might be in the region, helping to conduct the sabotage of railways, bridges, military facilities, and also in Belarus. And Murphy says that this has been going on since the Obama era. What do you have to make about this? Where does this fit into this larger proxy war, especially historically?
It seems plausible. I will have to look into it deeper and see what evidence there is of this. I mean, we know of incidents that happen, explosions or dysfunction in infrastructure that you really can't explain. So maybe it's part of this. But then just remember, this is what the United States has been doing to Syria all of this time, also to Iran all of this time. They were in Iraq and in Afghanistan. I mean, full-scale invasion, bombing, military operations, storming cities, and still to what end? What did they achieve? What did they accomplish? And this, again, we're talking about Iraq and Afghanistan. Now we're talking about Russia, a much larger country, a country with a much more capable defense, better infrastructure, and the means to repair and expand that infrastructure. So it just seems like futility. The U.S. is doing what it can because there's nothing else that it can do. So they're focusing on a sabotage campaign inside Russia. Yes, it's going to inconvenience Russia. It will cost them. But you have to look at the vector sum of everything. And does it add up to stopping Russia? And I think the answer is no. I don't think that it is. Look at what's going on with Ukraine. The vector sum of everything Russia is doing, the strikes on its military and military infrastructure, the strikes on its power grid. I mean, the economy is completely gone. It is artificially propped up by millions, billions of dollars flowing in from the West to pay salaries, to keep basic things going. So when you compare the results of what Russia is doing and what the U.S. and its allies and its proxies are doing, you can kind of see the trajectory this conflict is going, and it does not look good for the West. I think look at everything the West has done up to this point in the 21st century, and it has been one failure after the other. And they're taking on the most challenging opponents so far. I don't think this is going to be the first time they succeed.